Gerhardt Center organized the webinar. This is part of a series organized by the Gerhardt Center. Of course, as we know, the COVID-19 is causing a shock of unprecedented magnitude worldwide to all human beings, affecting all societies, and most important, the most vulnerable ones in societies. The Gerhardt Center is launching, therefore, this webinar entitled The Aftermath of COVID-19, the New Social Impact Ecosystem. So it's important to emphasize that there are many aspects to the implications of COVID-19, but we're particularly concerned with the socioeconomic and the social impact. We hope to be discussing here concepts that are not mainstream and may, or perhaps should, become mainstream in the aftermath of the COVID-19. So, for example, the first session was by Mr. Hashim Dandarawi, who discussed the case of the Dandara Cultural Center in south of Egypt as an exemplary community, a platform through which bottom-up approaches to community development, youth leadership have been practiced. In a second session, we had Professor Alan Fowler, who discussed the interesting question of whether the future is indeed horizontal. And today, the third session, I'm very privileged and honored to be introducing Dr. Abla Abdel Latif, who will lead a very important discussion, I think, about the informal sector in Egypt and its future in light of the recent crisis and events. طبعا, of course, Dr. Abla is not in need of much introduction. She held many exemplary positions, both governmental, non-governmental, and most importantly, also academic and research. She's currently the chair of the Presidential Advisory Council for Economic Development in Egypt. She's the executive director and director of research of the Egyptian Center for Economic Studies, ECS. She's also a member of the Central Bank of Egypt's Coordinating Council and has been a board member of the National Bank of Egypt. I should mention she was the first female in this position for over 6 years. She particularly feels honored that in 2013 she was a member of the Committee of 50, whose mission was to draft Egypt's constitution following June 30, 2013. She's also a co-founder and board member of very important and influential organizations such as Basira, the Egyptian Center for Public Opinion Research, and Nida Foundation for Job Creation for Women and Youth. In addition, and that's most personal for me in terms of her impact on me as her colleague, and very briefly, even though the age difference is only a couple of months, I think, she was my professor of economics at the American University in Cairo. In fact, she taught there for 20 years. She has been selected in view of her outstanding research and academic contribution as a lifetime research fellow at the Economic Research Forum, ERF, and she's a member of the advisory board of another institution that produces research, high quality research in the Euro-Mediterranean region, the FEMIS institution, among other many posts, but I'll leave it at that. Let me turn to the topic of today, and I think the title kind of speaks to why it is of utmost importance. There is a controversy around the reality of what the informal sector is. I think Dr. Abla would enlighten us with her knowledge and expertise on that, and particularly with a focus on answering the question whether it is a burden on the economy or in fact a jewel in the rough. We're using the opportunity of COVID-19 to see what can this reveal about those questions, and what are the losses and opportunities emerging out of the crisis in relation to informality in general. Everyone, I'm sure, will have questions as they're listening. Please go ahead and post your questions on the chat. We have here members, research members and managers in the Gerhardt Center who will be collecting and compiling your questions, and we'll ask them to Dr. Abla, and I'm sure there'll be enough room to answer everybody's question, but please feel free to type them on the chat as they come along. Without further ado, I leave the floor to Dr. Abla, and don't hesitate to let me know if you have any questions also on the chat, and I will respond to them. Thank you very much. Dr. Abla, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here, always a pleasure to be interacting within AUC. AUC for me is home, so it's really a great pleasure, and especially when I'm interacting with friends, close friends like Dr. Ali Aouni and Dr. Mona Saeed, and I see Dr. Nagla and a bunch of other people. It's great to see familiar faces. That's so good to see you. Let me start by saying كل سنة وانتم طيبين. And also say very quickly a few words about the Egyptian Center for Economic Studies, the research center where I'm the director of research and the executive director. We have a website where we produce, where you will find posted on daily basis actually news, commentary on economic news. We've been doing this for like 3 or 4 years. From the beginning of the COVID-19 problem, we started to work very hard from home to produce a large number of quick research papers that are assessing the impact of Corona on the different sectors of the economy. We produce about 12 reports at this point. I strongly advise you to look at them because they're actually quite useful, and they are being actually used by the government in starting to work on how to improve things within sectors and try to predict the impact. But let me quickly move on to today's topic. When I talked with Ali about it, okay, I'll keep on playing with the screen a little bit. It's not lovely to keep looking at yourself all the time. I want to see you guys better as I talk. I told them I'm going to talk about the reality of the informal sector, whether it's a burden or a jewel, and what happened with the crisis and what has the crisis revealed for us in terms of opportunities. I'm going to leave the answer to the question of whether it's a burden or a jewel actually to the end of my talk, because I think that the answer will emerge by itself, and I sort of leave it for you to come up with the conclusion. Let's talk a little bit about the reality of the informal sector. Is the informal sector really a big jello thing, a huge thing that has no particular features that are clear? Is it one unit? We always talk about it as if it's one unit, the informal sector. Okay, we don't try to divide it into its various components, and it's always looked at as if it's an insult. So say, oh, he belongs to the informal sector. It's like you're saying he has corona. Okay, so it's almost a stigma to be part of the informal sector. So what is this reality? Let me mention a few things quickly to set the stage here. First of all, the level of informality in general increases the less developed the country is. And in the case of Egypt, we are talking about a huge sector in totality. 50% of our workers, if we exclude agriculture, actually belong to the informal sector, are informal workers. If you include agriculture, we're talking about 63%. Their contribution to the economy is equivalent to something like 40% of GDP. 90% of our micro and small enterprises are actually informal in nature. Okay, so we are actually talking about a huge sector, huge to the extent that one can say that we are more informal than formal. And if we really want to describe our situation, we are more informal than formal. Formal is the exception. Okay, so this is for starters. Now, most important is to understand that informality or the informal sector is not one big unit. It's actually divided into a number of pieces or segments. And we've decided to divide them into actually 3 segments. One, the workers, the individuals who are working in different places here and there, like the daily workers and so on. The informal enterprises, okay? And very important, the informal transactions within the formal sector. It's very important to see them as those 3, okay? Because each one is actually different from the other. The rationale for its existence is different. Its features are different, okay? And therefore also the way you deal with it is different. Okay? So if we talk about the informal workers, okay, we are talking about 60% of the people who are in the informal sector are people who are working as individuals, okay? 40% of them are working for others, 20% are working for themselves, another 20% they are in family businesses, okay? You have actually the small businesses that do not live up to being enterprises, but like the ones that you see in the street selling food and so on and so forth, okay? And here, the reason they are informal, the reason those people are working informally is because the most basic and obvious thing, the government actually does not provide enough jobs. There aren't enough jobs that are created in the system, okay, to accommodate all of them. The room for social mobility is actually very limited. Okay? People go to school, and then when they graduate, they cannot find jobs, and they have aspirations. They cannot realize their aspirations. They try to do it outside the sector. A very important reason is that many of them were actually waiting for the government employment. In 1962, we had a decree called the Employment Drive, and according to that decree or that law, the government committed itself to employing each and every graduate. Believe it or not, until today, this law is not cancelled. Okay? It's not used, but it's not cancelled. So people are actually, some of them are actually waiting. Okay? And all the time, the advantages that are associated with being a governmental employee, when you go and take a loan from the bank, they ask for a guarantee from someone who has actually a governmental position. Okay, so there are always advantages that are associated with working for the government. So people are actually waiting. Okay, so a big percentage of that as well. Of course, and then on top of this, you have, of course, the poverty of the people and the fact that they cannot often get the decent level of education that gives them the chance to get to find jobs. So this is actually the rationale for the existence of that part. Then comes the second one, and I tell you that the informal enterprise, and I tell you that 90% of the small and micro enterprises are actually informal in nature. Okay, and the reason these guys exist this way, we're talking about workshops, so we are talking about activities related to agriculture and industrial workshops and trade activities. These are the type of enterprises we're talking about. And the reason they are there is simply because it's a pain in the neck to be part of the formal sector. I mean, they look at their colleagues who are formal and they are suffering. They're suffering from the bureaucracy. They are suffering from the different institutions that keep on pushing them all the time. If you're working in food, you are going to find 10 different authorities that are coming to check on you. They are looking at the tax system and the fact that it's actually changing all the time and pushing, etc., etc., etc. So it's the failure of the formal sector that has led to the enterprises being part of the informal sector. In the informal sector, they enjoy very high flexibility. They don't have to obey any rules. Their major problem is the fact that as they get finance, it's very difficult for them to get finance. When they take loans, they have to go to NGOs to take loans. They don't have access to the finance from the banks at reasonable interest rates. So they take loans at like 30% interest rate or something like that. Okay? Because of their informal nature, they don't have access to the new technology. They don't have access to the, of course, they don't provide the good working conditions, and they don't. It's a luxury that they can't afford. When you look at the third type, which is the transactions within the informal sector, and this actually is extremely interesting, and 40% or 30% of people who are in the informal sector are related to this. You find a formal company, okay, perfectly formal, perfectly legal papers, okay, but at the same time, it is employing some people without insurance, or it's employing some people with contracts that are open. Just a second. Again, one is not used to Zoom and seeing himself suddenly, so I have to come back to you guys. Okay. So they are. I lost it. Yes, so they are employing people without paying them insurance. They're employing people with contracts that can be cancelled right away with no advantages. There is a lot of that in all formal enterprises. They are actually providing social protection for only a percentage of the ones who are working. The rest do not have those advantages, okay, at all. This is one part. A second part, the formal sector, in order to reduce its cost, many of its actual transactions within its supply chain, they actually resort to the informal sector. They buy certain products from an informal enterprise, okay? And they don't, and the informal enterprise does not pay taxes, does not have official papers, so they cannot have actually a proper legal receipt, okay? So a lot of this is happening within the formal sector as well, and it's an important part that you cannot ignore. Some of the rationale that you hear from the formal sector is to say we are competing with the informal sector. Those guys are affecting us negatively. So to protect ourselves and to cut our costs, we try to cut our costs also by dealing with them. So it's a vicious circle. Okay. So this is how the informal sector really looks like. What happens during crises in general? Okay, we mentioned two crises. I mean, you have the revolution, 25th of January revolution, 2011, and before that you have the financial crisis. In these two, because of the economic situation, there were a lot of loss of jobs. And in the two crises combined, the informal sector managed to absorb 1.6 million people who actually lost jobs in the process. Okay, which is huge. It absorbed the shock of the crisis. Okay, when we talk about the COVID-19, the situation is completely different, because here the informal sector has been hit just like the formal sector. So its ability to absorb has actually disappeared, and this is really the scariest part about it. And this is actually the reason why the government has been so keen on trying to pay people monthly incomes, monthly money, and so on and so forth, because they realize actually perhaps for the first time how huge the sector is. I mean, I gave you the numbers and they show you how huge, but the government did not see it. They saw it when suddenly they found that huge number of their people are actually very, very poor. Why? Because they were all absorbed in this informal sector, in this economic machine, okay, that is actually hidden and yet working in the economy. Okay, one thing that the crisis revealed, okay, is how indispensable the informal sector is. Okay, really indispensable. It's an integral part of the economic system for the country as a whole. Okay? Even we as individuals feel it. Okay, you have in your life on daily basis, there are things that you do and there are people that you deal with from the informal sector. The most basic help at home. Okay, I'll make it very, very, very simple and very basic. Okay, it's an integral and key part in our life that we felt the need of, okay, and the importance of during the crisis. And this is actually extremely important. Okay, so they are not on the periphery of the economy. They are not on the periphery of life. They are actually citizens who have actually rights and have been ignored. One more thing that was also realized is that the informal sector is key for the survival of the poor. When you talk about the informal workers or some of the informal enterprises, I told you that a large part of the activity is associated with trade. Okay, this trade is associated with Chinese goods, cheap Chinese goods. Okay, you have all those souq, all those markets. Okay, for the lower income people. Okay, they cannot afford other things. So we are talking about a huge segment of the population that not only is losing jobs, but also because of their low income, their ability to survive is very poor because the informal sector cannot accommodate things for them. One more thing that was also clearly discovered is that because informality is very often associated with poverty and with people who are living in poor districts and densely populated districts, okay, these people are actually a big problem. This is one of the questions that have been going through my mind and really, really scaring me. And you see them in all the jokes that we keep on exchanging on our mobiles when we talk about crowded places. You are talking about crowded places, not because these people want to be together all the time and hugging each other and standing in crowds, but they're actually living in very, very small places. Okay? And because they live, we have more than 2 million families in Egypt that do not have actually decent apartment. And I can give you within this scary numbers for people who do not have a faucet at home, or do not have a kitchen, or do not have a bathroom like we know. So they live in very difficult conditions. This in itself is a problem for our health situation and for the corona. Okay, if one of these guys sneezes in the balcony of his home, he's actually going to, the sneeze is going to reach the guy who's 1 meter away, and that's in the building across. Okay, it's that bad. Okay, so we are talking about, if we do not take care of the informality, the informal sector, the poverty, and it's all intertwined, okay, we are not going to be able to control the crisis properly, and we actually run the very, very serious risk of having huge holes of where you have very high density of corona concentration. And I think the government is starting to realize this, but as always, we are reacting. We are not preparing for things in advance. We are always reacting. So if they find few people that are sick, they close the zone. Okay, but the question is whether closing the zone actually is the solution in the first place, yes or no. Having given you all those negativity associated with the informality, let me try to be a bit positive and talk about the opportunities that have actually emerged out of the crisis. Okay, and there are serious opportunities and very positive ones. One of them, and it's the most important one, is the realization of the government of how serious this problem is, and that it's important that these guys go back to work. Okay, because they cannot afford to take care of them completely. So they need them to work, all right? This realization means, I hope, that they will try to approach the formalization of the informal sector in a much better way than what has been happening, okay? And I can talk a bit about that in one of the questions, show you the difference between the approach that they're adopting and what should be adopted. So this is one positive outcome. Another positive outcome is that we're starting to have more data about the informality, okay? Through the payment of the £500 with the Ministry of Manpower, even though people are suffering in order to get them, and there are all sorts of issues associated with that, but you are starting to have more information about the sector, and that's important because with no information, you cannot plan, you cannot have policies, you cannot do anything, okay? We are realizing, I think, the serious needs of improving the conditions of the formal sector. Because the reason why they are informal is because the formal is doing so badly. Okay, the doing business in Egypt is a problem. Okay, we talk all the time about changing it, about improving it, but we are not doing enough in this area. And there is a serious need to work on this in order to reduce the informality or accommodate the informality in the formal economy in a respectable way, which is the way it should be. One more thing also is the fact that people who are working in the informal sector became aware, okay, that perhaps there is a bit of benefit to being associated with the government or part of the system somehow, because their drop was very serious with the crisis. So, I mean, when you offer the informal enterprises to join the formal sector and you are not going to pay any taxes, don't worry, they don't care. Because they don't pay taxes in the first place. So they look around them, there is nothing positive about anything that's happening that would encourage them to be part of it. Okay? But what happened with the crisis, okay, and the serious sudden increase in poverty, because many of these people live from hand to mouth and on daily basis, not even on monthly basis, especially that, and I will open a small bracket here for something that I missed saying. The informal sector became huge in Egypt, starting from the time we applied the economic reform program, started from the 90s, okay? And it started to evolve in a way that is very scary. Not only are we talking about informal jobs, but we are talking about irregularity in the informal jobs. In other words, you are not working for, like, you have a monthly income in an irregular job, okay, but you are not even sure that you're going to be working for a month. Okay, it's going to be a week. You're not sure if you're going to have the job tomorrow. So there has been a deterioration in their conditions. I close the bracket. So the people from this sector have felt a bit of sense of perhaps the importance of being part of the system, and this prepares them more for formalization if it is done in the proper way that should be done. One last thing in this area is related to a type of informality that I did not talk about much because the prevailing, the vast majority are from the first group that I've been describing all the time. But you actually have informality for geniuses. You have informality for entrepreneurs. You have people who have great ideas and they cannot make them alive through the system. Okay, so they start their informal enterprises and they produce things that are actually very, very, very interesting. Okay. These guys are opportunity. They are a jewel, and they need to be exploited by the government. The government needs to realize that there is a lot of talent in Egypt that is often actually ignored. So I see very clearly, and my opinion, and this is the answer to the most important question. Is it a burden on economy for those people who don't pay taxes, those horrible teachers, or is it a jewel in the rough? It is. They are a jewel in the rough for sure. Okay, if we treat them the way they should be, okay, and if we talk to them and we work together on making them part of the formal sector, we are going to improve the development potential of this country. We are going to reduce poverty, and we are going to achieve great things. I wasn't looking at the time. I hope I did not exceed my 20 minutes. Thank you.
No, this fine. You perfect, I think. you can even speak for a few more minutes if you like, but I would like to just take the opportunity just to maybe kickstart the questions and make a few comments of my own. Lots of very interesting points you made, Dr. Abla. Maybe I can just pick on 2 or 3 here. And the idea that, that shocks kind of bring, a shock also in our understanding. The fact that we had those shocks kind of exposed that the number of poor, the number of people who are working in substandard conditions and informal conditions is really much larger than we would imagine. So we all know the figure of 30%. 30% of Egyptians are under the poverty line. And if we extrapolate that to the labor market, again, it is a shock that when you try to think of a minimum wage or anything like that, any minimum wage that you can think of is going to be actually above the mean or above the average wage. So as you rightly said, informality, which is very strongly related to poverty, is actually seems to be more the norm, not the exception. So, some estimates show that those people we see on the labor market, 60% of them can be considered low-waged or below the poverty line in terms. So this is the situation before this crisis. And this crisis, has exposed that, this is really a fact, and this is a fact that would increase if there is no intervention. Now, the question that is also related to that immediately is, how did those people survive on less than minimum conditions? What were the resilience mechanisms at the household level, and how did what was also the resilience mechanisms of the enterprises, and will those resilience mechanisms now continue post COVID-19, or are they eradicated? And again, the answer might be, as you alluded here, very worrying and negative, because the answer is they relied on each other. They relied on social networks, and they relied on family and friends, and they relied on the informal sector. So if everybody is negatively impacted, what would be the alternative resilience mechanism? And again, that leads to the third and last point I'd like to make is, in absence at a time when there is inadequate then informal mechanisms for resilience and survival for enterprises and individuals, everybody looks then at the state and the social protection in place. And you know, we are cognizant of what the government, like all governments around the world, have announced in terms of you know, providing basic income and unconditional cash support for people who are in the informal sector and lost their jobs. But then, you know, a lot of talk is also about expanding the existing social protection, such as takaful and karama. You know, what are your views on, you know, the adequacy of the existing social protection in the country? And is it just a matter of providing those kind of cash transfers and support, you know, at the very basic minimum, or are we really talking about you know, a big wake-up call to the absence of a strong welfare state, you know, especially in terms of health and education provision? And you know, can you see any silver lining or positive steps that are taken that perhaps can make us, you know, be a little bit more positive about what's happening? You know, maybe I should give you the, you know, the floor to speak, and then, you know, we'll have Kariman then come to us with other questions and other questions from the floor. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Let me start from the last question up, okay? First of all, let me say that it's a very big wake-up call, very, very big wake-up call. Not only for the social reasons and the social network, but also for the economic, the way we are managing our economy. And it's very important to understand that one of the key failures of our system is the separation between the social segment of the social part and the economic part. So whenever we talk economy, okay, we talk on the side, oh, let's take care of the poor. It doesn't work this way. The whole idea about inclusive growth is about having everybody involved, and the social policies are an integral part of the economic system. So this is my first point. My second point, takaful and karama, in my opinion, have been abused, okay? And takaful and karama is a project that tries to help the poor families. It's covering about something like 3 or 4 million families, all in all, with certain specific conditions, mainly women-led families. It started with the reform, okay? And the government suddenly decided that whenever somebody asks about poverty, somebody asks about social equality, they say, oh, but we have takaful and karama. Takaful and karama is way, way, way less than what is needed. We cannot rely on such program. What you need is to improve your system so as it becomes more transparent, so that it achieves social mobility, to adjust your education system so that when you get educated and you actually graduate, you can find a job. This is what we need. This is what will save the country. It's not going to be takaful and karama. And the repetition of that is actually wrong. Okay, I feel very, very strongly about this. Okay, the social protection from the government, the fact that they are giving them money and all, they have no choice but to give them money. They are citizens, they have the right to live. Okay, the entire world is doing that. The biggest capitalist countries, whenever looked at the social level, are actually doing that. And there is a lot of talk about having a universal income level, minimum universal income level that actually be available for everybody, whether they have a job or not. People have right to live with pride and with respect. And I think, and I strongly believe, that the main target of the country should be and should have been and will continue to be that people survive this situation with pride. Okay, and they can actually live a decent life. Not only notice that what's happening right now, in spite of all efforts, is not really lovely. I mean, you look at pictures, people are standing in huge numbers at the post office or at the bank to get the 500 pounds. Okay, which is going to be there for 2 months, and who knows what's going to happen next. So the government has no choice. Okay, the means for it is another story. Okay, but it's not a matter of choice. You asked an important question about how these people are going to survive. Okay, and they will survive actually in a way better than than what many people would expect because of one key feature that they have, and it's actually their biggest strength, and that's they are extremely flexible and extremely smart in being able to adjust to the needs of the market. Okay, you drive your car on your way to AUC and you find a place that's completely empty. There's nobody, and then you find a guy with small cart selling sandwiches. Okay, why? Because he's aware that there are people who pass by this place and they will need to have breakfast. Okay, and so they have this natural entrepreneurship skill, and it's a survival skill. Okay, how to make ends meet with something that's very small, and it's a shame that we don't benefit from this intelligence. Okay, from this Egyptian intelligence. Let's put it this way. Okay, the fact that we have a huge informal sector. The way around the problem is simply to develop. It's that simple. Okay, from the beginning, I said that countries, we have like 40%, what is equivalent to 40% of GDP associated with these people. The size of the informal sector in the other countries is a lot smaller. Even when you compare to our neighboring countries, we compare to Tunisia, we compare to Jordan, we have a much smaller informal sector. If you go to the UK, to Sweden, to the European countries, we're talking about much smaller number. What is the difference? The difference is in the level of the development. Okay, so it's a matter of having the proper vision, going in the proper direction. Okay, where everybody is involved, where you have inclusive growth, exactly what the term means and says. If we really seek inclusive growth, you are not going to be in this situation after that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abla. I've been receiving some questions on the chat that I directed to Kariman. The first one I received was from Dr. Nagla Riz. So does Kariman want to start by posing the questions? I think you need to unmute yourself, yeah? Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Mona. Thank you, Dr. Abla, for such an insightful and informative discussion. Okay, we will do the questions on multiple rounds, depending on how much time we will have, okay? Okay, let me start by that from Dr. Nagla. To what extent do you think there is a realization on the part of the government of what you have very well represented? Another question, after the lockdown, do you think that the government should focus on formalizing the informal sector or improving their capacity to deal with the post-pandemic situation? Also, we have an interesting question from Dr. Dina about the cash transfer to the informal workers. It requires some sort of declaration of status. And this is itself a very positive move towards formalizing the informal sector. Since it's very highly selective, do you think that the workers who are not willing to declare their informality will not benefit from the cash transfer? So she wants to know your views about that. So I'll give you the chance to answer those questions and then we can take another round. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. About the first question from my good friend and colleague Nagla, does the government realize that? Yes. Yes, I know that. I have those two positions, as you know. All the studies that we're preparing, everything that I said is actually being passed on directly, actually, to the President's office. Okay, and it is receiving a lot of attention and being passed on to the system for work. So yes, there is a high realization for this. How much of this realization will translate into action? Okay, you have a world of a mess called government, okay, with its bureaucracy and its stuff, but the realization is there, and this is actually the most important first step. So I believe that things are going to improve, hopefully. About the lockdown and about whether they should formalize the informal sector or deal or simply let them be, let's put it this way. No, I think you need to have both, okay? The formalization needs to be done, but it needs to be done in the right way, okay, in the following sense. So far, we've been approaching formalization from a taxation perspective. Okay? We want to formalize the informal sector because those horrible creatures, they are benefiting from the advantages and the living conditions in the country, and they're not paying their taxes, and this is bad. This has been our approach, and it's the wrong approach, and it doesn't work. And none of the countries that have succeeded in dealing with informality have dealt with this approach. Okay? The target of the formalization should be to improve the conditions of the people there, okay? And to know the level of production, to improve things, to improve quality of goods so that you would have a bigger GDP and a better performance. Notice that there are informal companies right now that export. How can you export when you're informal? Okay, very simple. You export through another company, through the papers of another company. So people have an incredible way of going around things. Okay? So how should the formalization take place? Okay, and this is a proposal that's actually still on the table. That formalization should go about in the following way. One, you have to know what carrot would encourage the informal sector to consider being formal, and the carrot lies in having access to finance at reasonable cost. They don't care about offering them no taxation. They don't care about anything else. But they do care of having access to finance at a reasonable interest rate, okay, in order to buy a new machine, in order to start a certain project of some kind. And what needs to be done is actually to offer them this opportunity. We are offering 5% for the small enterprises. Don't give them 5%. Give them 7 or 8% against, okay, the following, that they would come, declare themselves, you would know who they are, what type of production they do, okay, what type of work they do, okay, that's one. Two, you give them a period of time to adjust their situation, let's say 2 to 3 years, okay, to become formal. And during this period, they are enjoying the benefits and no one is suing them, okay, no one is taking them to jail, all right? But they are trying to improve their conditions to the maximum extent possible, and they are not in any kind of legal trouble for 3 years. Then after those 3 years, if they don't become formal, then the government can tell them, okay, you have a problem, and you would start some legal actions. But this requires something very important. That requires closing the circle, which means what? That the government should do its own thing as well. For example, if it's a workshop that's located in the city, and this is not a location for having a workshop that's doing metal work or doing furniture, okay, I have to provide that. The government, have to provide locations for them. Okay, I have to assign a certain location in different governorates where this is for the informal sector that becomes formal. And the location is there. So I'm giving them the solution. I cannot tell them just go formalize yourselves and I leave everything as it is. I have to fix my system for getting a permit. I have to fix my system for getting a location for the job, etc., etc. So it's extremely important this way. There is a part of the informal sector that will remain informal, and this is really the part that's associated with the micro enterprises, the ones that are dealing with the poverty, that are there for poverty alleviation, actually more than actual, jobs or enterprises. Okay, part of it will have to remain informal. Okay, but improving the conditions is the responsibility, is actually the responsibility of the government. So this is my answer. My answer to that. Yes, there is a third type also that needs to exist, and the best way to show it is by giving you the example of the sector. Handicrafts. Handicrafts are produced in homes by women in it. What do you do about these? These will have to remain informal, but the government should provide incentives for the creation of marketing companies that are formal, whose job is to try to export the products. They find the buyers, external buyers, and they know what products are needed. They ask all those people who are working at home to produce those products, okay? And they are the ones that do the exporting and give them the juice. Here you are actually improving the condition of the people who are working in those circumstances, and you are doing it through a formal channel, okay? And this is a perfectly legal and good channel for dealing with the informality when things are being done at home and at a very, very small scale. About the third question, about the cash transfers, declaration of status is a must. I think if anyone is not willing to declare his status, okay, the government cannot help him. It's as simple as that. Okay? The thing is, however, how do you declare your status in a way that keeps your dignity? Okay, and the government started by doing things wrong, try to improve things a little bit, but still they are not completely right. They started by having a link on the computer link, okay, just like Zoom, our technology now, for people to enter and say, we need the money. And obviously this didn't work, okay? Then they started to say, send a message to tell us your needs, okay? The best way to do it is through those messages or through call centers, okay? Where the access to information about poverty, we do know who is poor and where, okay? With CAPMAS, we do know that. With the changes that we made to the supply, this card, the subsidy card, okay, we know who are the poor families. We know where poverty is concentrated. We know where things are. So if those databases that are available, and unfortunately at this point they are separate. The Ministry of Social Solidarity has its own database. The Ministry of Supply, local supply, has its own database. If those databases are accessible, people who are in the call centers can receive the information of the person through his ID card. They would check, okay, the level of something about an indicator for the poverty, and they would simply send him that he could go and pick up his money, not from the bank, but rather from the post offices. And we have 4,000 of them spread all over the country. Okay, if they go to the post offices in the different places, chances are the crowds are going to be of a smaller number, so you'll be achieving more than one benefit at the same time. I'm done with these.
Thank you so much. Okay. Okay, we have a question about the governance of the support. How can we make technical or financial support reach the informal sector, given their characteristics, that there are no registration, no bank account, switching mobile phones, and things like that? That's the first one. Also, a question from Dr. Nagla. Can you speak on whether there is attention accorded to women in the informal sector, given that women typically bear the burden of the crisis on more than one level? Also, a good question here, do you think that there are other stakeholders in the economy other than the government that could help formalization? And let me end with that. What does the informal sector need now in Egypt other than being formalized? Is it just formalization that will make everything better? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. About the governance of the support, how do you give them anything? How do you reach them if they're not registered? They're not anything. It is very simple. Again, it's the carrot. Okay, everybody responds to the proper incentives. The entire economic system is about incentives and disincentives. Okay, let me give you an example, far from the informal sector, but it will reflect the view right away. When we talk about the financial inclusion, okay, and we have the retirement cards, and people go every month to use the retirement card, put it in the ATM machine, and collect their money. Okay, and we are very happy with that. But actually, they collect their money in cash, and they spend the cash through the month. Okay, so what have we done? Nothing. All right. How do you fix that? How do you convince him not to use cash but use a card? Okay, first you would want to have the retirement card that he has act as a Visa card that he could buy things with. So all you have to do is just send him a message on the phone telling him the money is there, or he knows that from the second day of the month the money is there. He will go to the store and buy his stuff. Okay, if you do that and he can go to the store and actually buy stuff, okay, then you have solved the problem without any pressure, without any kind of interference. But in order to do that, again, you have to complete the circles. Okay, I'm obsessed with those circles because this is really our problem. We don't complete our solutions. You have to tell the stores to let people use their card for buying. And they're not going to do that on their own. You have to remove the tax that they have to pay right now every time they use it. This is why you find the cute card machine, sitting on the shelf in small stores. You ask them, can I use the Visa card? They tell you, no, it's not working. It is working. but he doesn't want to pay the tax associated with it. So if you remove this tax and you let the retirement card become a credit card, okay, then you are going to have very serious big steps in the financial inclusion, and very quickly, without much interference. The same applies to the informal sector. If you offer the incentives, this is why I talked about the finance, because we did a study actually a few years ago when I was at the Ministry of Industry, okay, asking the informal sector, what is it that interests you the most? And it's the financing. So if I give him the opportunity for the financing at a reasonable cost, in return for all sorts of other things that I mentioned, okay, then it can work. This is how the governance system would work, okay? Attention to women. Women, actually, I forgot, so thank you for reminding me, Nagla, of this. Women actually are the majority of people that are working in the informal sector. It's a significant percentage, particularly in agriculture. And women somehow are hamalin lasay, and let's put it this way. They're always carrying the burden, and they're always suffering. I don't think, however, in this particular case, you can offer women more money than men. You deal with, you know, the households, and you offer the income that's being offered on monthly basis to the head of the household. And this is an area where expanding Takaful and Karama can help a little bit, because this program is completely directed to women, okay? But again, women and men alike are both stuck in a system that needs serious improvement, and it will benefit all when the system is improved. If the system is improved, the direct and indirect benefits are going to be huge at all levels. Other stakeholders, of course, the civil society, definitely. And the civil society has not been playing its role, okay, lately, not because they do not want to play, but actually because the law that was, you know, pending for a couple of years actually discouraged the civil society from operating in the economy in a serious way. So definitely there is a role for the civil society, and actually the civil society is helping out with the survival of the people. I mean, check the ads on TV, see what the food bank is doing, what all those organizations, all those NGOs are doing to try to help people survive. They wouldn't survive otherwise. You would be surprised at how important the role is in providing health services, in providing incomes, in providing food support. So definitely the civil society is important. Is there a solution for being, other than being formalized? Yes. Yes, before being formalized, you have to start by believing that every citizen in this country has the same right as everybody else. We need to look, implement, understand that there is something called social equality, okay? And the social equality does not mean reducing poverty, okay? Poverty is just a simple item in it, okay? Reducing inequality means that you would have transparency in the system, and you would have the social mobility in the system, which simply means that you have an efficient system. If you have an efficient system, then when you go to school and you study and you graduate, you are going to find jobs. Why? Because the education system is guided to the needs of the country. Okay? Why? Because the formal sector is operating with a decent and good business environment, okay? And so they can create actually more jobs. Instead of trying to avoid employing people formally, they would employ them formally, okay? Just like when you give advantages to enterprises when they do R&D, for instance, okay? They would do their corporate social responsibility properly. It's all a matter of incentives. It's all a matter of governance. So it is governance, political will, for really achieving the social equality and believing that all people are equal and have equal rights, okay? This comes before the formalization. As a matter of fact, if this is there, formalization is going to happen naturally, okay? It will not be a problem at all.
Are there any remaining few questions, or shall we wrap up? Kariman?
If you have the stamina to take some more questions, we have we have some.
Maybe we can devote a couple of minutes to that.
We're still far from iftar, so that the bit of energy that's remaining is going to be useful.
Okay, some of the audience are asking about the availability of fresh research on the informality in Egypt. So if you have a recommendation, that would be great. Another question from the Business Forward, do you have alternative policy other than what the government is doing that would be better than current relief or mitigation efforts, not hypothetical post-corona recovery efforts? Something else other than the government is doing? Do you have other recommendations? Thank you.
Okay.
May I add on a related front, just one final thing about the impact of now the informal economy and the shock that it's taking, the people losing their jobs and or not finding jobs. Actually, the expected macroeconomic impact of all that, the other way around now, that they, shouldn't there be now very big repercussions to the government budget, to inflation, to consumption, to generalized recession, and what can actually be done about this, because the government doesn't control enough activity there to be able to invigorate it. So what can happen then? Thank you.
Okay. About the first question, is there any fresh research? The fresh research is exactly what I've been talking about, and I strongly invite you to check the website of the ECS, okay? Because we have all those reports, and there is one that is written about the informal sector that involves a lot of details, plus it involves even the impact of the informal sector and on the informal sector from one week to the other during the virus cycle, okay? The beginning, the expansion, and hopefully the recovery, plus estimation for the actually future, the number of unemployed. It's estimated that the number of unemployed in the last quarter of this fiscal year, okay, is about 3 million workers, which is huge, which means that the unemployment rate will go up from 8% or 9% that we had formally to 12% formally, okay? And this is a big jump within a couple of months. It is scary. Okay, so it's really, and so I would advise you to look at that. Is there an alternative policy? There is no one policy. There is a package of policies, okay? There is a system that is integrated, that is well connected, okay? A system that addresses all the what ifs questions. If this happens, what am I gonna do? If this happens, what am I gonna do? So it's not one policy. What the government is doing right now is deal with the emergency situation of helping people survive, okay? And this is the top priority for all governments in the entire world, not just in Egypt, okay? The disaster would be to continue after the crisis to look at supporting in the same way. This is not the solution, okay? What is needed is to have a package of solutions. Package of solutions involves the following. Involves improving the business environment so that the private sector can create more jobs. 1, 2, improve the quality of the education and direct it to the needs of the market. 3, improve the vocational education and the vocational training, which is essential for industry, which is actually the biggest job creator at this point, okay? 4, improve the governance system in the entire country so that the planning and the implementation and the monitoring are not done by the same institution for itself, and then you clap for yourself and your performance. We have to get out of this vicious circle of institutional failure, okay? This is really the solution. So to work on the economy, fix the institutional problems, solve the problems that are stopping the sectors from exporting, that are stopping the sectors from expanding, that are making us import components that we can produce at home because we don't have the proper incentives, okay? And at the same time, the ones that cannot work, the ones that cannot find income, they are the ones that need to have the welfare system. So you categorize everybody, the ones who have to remain informal, you improve their conditions, and you give them certain advantages while keeping them informal. The ones that can become formal and very small, if we talk about taxation, we talk about what's called riba maqtu'a, which is a very small number that they would pay on a monthly basis, irrespective of the income that they make. You need to design the answer as per the problem, because the informal sector is not one unit, okay, with similar features. It's a bunch of components with different features, okay? So you have to look at them in this way, in a way that starts by respecting the people, to seeing them as a jewel in the rough, and take it from there. And understanding that solving the informality is at the heart of solving the problems of the economy itself and solving its institutional problems, okay? As to your question, Mona, this is a subject for another lecture. But what I can tell you that at the macro level, of course, we are in deep trouble. The informal sector is everywhere as far as the economy is concerned. So when you look at the economy, you see not only its impact, but it's the impact of the entire situation. You are not going to have revenues from tourism or from the Suez Canal or from labor remittances for a very long time, not less than a year and a half for recovery, okay? And when the recovery starts, it's not going to come with tourism, okay? Because tourism is a luxury good. People are going to go to the basics, okay? They are not going to go there. And tourism is one of the sectors that you're always talking about and where a lot of people are employed informal, okay? So it's a big issue. Your focus and your hope right now is in agriculture and in industry, okay, and in logistics. It's those three, okay, and in improving the liquidity of the different companies working everywhere, because this is the only way they can survive. And interestingly enough, you have investments that are migrating all over the world out of China, okay, and everybody is going to try and attract them, and we need to be there in the picture to attract them. There is an incredible level of competition between countries at this point. You notice, I'm sure, that the US was stealing the sanitizer that were going to Italy. Yeah, it's becoming ridiculous. But the thing is, when the size of the cake, okay, does not get bigger, which is what's going to happen in the entire world, because the rate of growth is going down, the only way for you to increase your share is by stealing from your neighbor, okay? You remember when in our courses, when we talk about the comparative advantage and the cake gets bigger, so your slice gets bigger? No, it's not gonna get bigger. The cake is going to stay put. So if you want to survive and make your people live better, you are going to take from the others, but take from the others in a legal way, not the Trump's way, okay? And that is by having the proper incentives that attract the investment, developing your local market. We have a huge local market. In Egypt, we're 100 million, but our purchasing power is actually very low, okay? So you need to develop this local market. And then beyond everything, you're going to have a new budget, the macro level and the budgeting of the government. You cannot plan the budget on having, we were growing at 5% last year, we are going to grow at, let's say 4% this year, let us work it out. No, you have to know what your assumptions are, what the given situation is, and then you take it from there and see how far you can go, because we are going to witness difficult times with slow growth. And unless we fix ourselves and we fix the problems that emerge big and clear during the crisis, emerge because they have always existed, but we have not looked at them, okay, enough, but we saw them when the crisis happened, whether we're talking about health or about education or whatever. There are big problems that became very clear, okay? It is time. The positive thing about the crisis is that it stopped the everyday life and the acceptance of the mistakes and the ongoing, simply let's go on and ignore the problems. It forced us to see the problems, and hopefully it will force us to solve them. If we do not solve them, we are going to be in deep trouble, and Egypt deserves a lot more than that, and hopefully we'll get a lot more.
Thank you so much, Abla. You're absolutely right. You need another talk and duration, and I hope this will be the first of many. Back to your alma mater and to AUC, and I'm very grateful for the Gerhard Center for allowing this opportunity. You spoke in your true element and passion on a variety of topics, but you were true to the goal of the series by bringing up, you know, issues of social equality and, you know, how everybody should be treated as equal, and maintenance of dignity as a basis for us to move forward economically or in all other aspects. And in the same spirit, the next talk in the this series will be by another distinguished woman professor, Professor Dorothy Bowman-Poley, Director of the Geneva Center for Business and Human Rights, Geneva School of Economics, and Research Director for Center of Business and Human Rights in New York University Stern School of Business. And the topic will be on business and human rights, which I hope will continue this very, very informative and enjoyable, I think, highly enjoyable discussion that kind of, I hope, help people throughout their fast now. Sallit siyamku until you break the fast soon. Thank you so much, Abla. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time and coming here. And, you know, I'm sure Kariman can share other questions with Dr. Abla, and she would be happy to receive, you know, her email is known, ECS website is known. I'm sure she'd be happy to interact with the participants if they have need for follow-up conversation. Thank you, Abla.
Thank you. Thank you all.